Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. It's always wonderful to hear the different stories, and this week is going to be no exception because we've got Humera Ansari, who will be our guest today. And Humera is a postdoc research assistant in the Department of Chemical Engineering at Imperial College. She's got such a fascinating story. Humera, I'm really so glad that you're here with us and that you're going to share your story with us this afternoon. So Humera, I'm going to kick off with my usual first question, and that is, can you tell me a little bit about what it was that gave you your sense of identity, your sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Yeah, so I was born and brought up in Dubai, which is a city in the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. But actually, my parents are not from the same country. So my mom is from India and my dad is from Pakistan. But they sort of moved to Dubai after they got married, and that's where I was born. So the idea of identity and belonging for me is quite interesting because the culture of my parents is totally different to the culture where I grew up in. And so my culture is sort of my own personal culture and also my sister. It's kind of sort of completely alien to what we grew up in and also what my parents originally have. So we sort of like to say, or I like to say, that I have a third culture, and like I'm a product of like a third culture environment where I've developed sort of a combination of both my parents and my surroundings and the culture that kind of results from that. So that's what I say I belong to, and that's what's kind of shaped my identity, sort of like half Arab and half Southeast Asian type culture. Yeah.
So how was that for you in school? Was it a similar situation for the children who and young people who you were in school with? Were there many people who were kind of like third culture? Because it sounds like a bit of a melting pot, a mixture of people who live there. Is that how it is, or?
Yeah, exactly. So I was definitely not alone in this kind of unique situation because everyone around me, my school friends, people I grew up with, my neighbors, most of those people were actually born in the same country, but their parents were from, all over the world. Um, maybe like a lot of them were from the UK or America or a lot of countries in Africa. So people from all over the world just raising their kids in Dubai. So it's quite nice because in a way I got to experience a whole lot of culture in a very short period of time. Eat lots of different food, see how a lot of people live, see a lot of what people wear, which is one of the most interesting things because that's, really quick indication of, where you come from. But over time I saw, because a lot of people, we kind of stayed there for a long time. At least I never changed schools. I was in the same school all the way from kindergarten to high school, and a lot of my friends were the same. So I saw basically how we all transformed from like these different starting points initially, but we all kind of ended up in the same place. We were sort of half and half of, half to buy in and half of whatever our parents are. So yeah, definitely. I didn't have a unique experience in that sense because around me everyone was the same, but I think it's quite different from what most people grow up with.
No, I am really fascinated with this idea of this melting pot that amongst your friends and your peers, you could see, although at home there was a culture, but you were defining your own culture based on taking almost like cherry picking little bits of everybody's culture and saying, we like this, we like that. And it's nice to accept those. Is that how it was? It was kind of like there was. I'm not going to say there was no prejudice or anything like that, but how was it? Was it that you were quite accepting and quite curious.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I really didn't get the idea that you could be discriminated against based on your skin color or where you're from until I really left Dubai,
Right.
which is maybe a lot of people don't actually believe me when I say that, but it's definitely true. I really, because for me, everyone was different,
Mhm.
completely different, from a different background and visually different. So I mean, if you were to discriminate against someone, I mean, on what basis really? Because everyone is so different. Um, and so yeah, I think what you said about picking and choosing what you liked and kind of what resonated personally as a person above all of this with you is kind of what shaped all of us as different individuals. Um, but yeah, I didn't really get the sense of at all that, I could be treated differently just because of the way I look or where I'm from until I left Dubai.
Okay, so you said that you were in the same school from kindergarten right the way up till you finished your A level equivalent of the A levels, etc. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you went to university. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Before we go to university, what were the kind of subjects that excited you or that you were interested in as you were growing up?
Yes, sort of like till middle school, I was very much into art and design and writing, poetry specifically. That was kind of my thing, just arts in general. Um, and that's what I wanted to do sort of as I went into my GCSEs and like high school at the time. But over time, I realized I really liked maths and I really wanted to use that as part of my career. And I didn't want to let that go if I just stuck to, pure like arts. And that's why I decided to kind of stick with the sciences too at the same time. So I kind of did maths and chemistry and physics and like English literature and art at the same time. So I was one of the only few people who was kind of doing both, trying to do both. And then at the end, I kind of realized that because I liked being creative and I liked that kind of thing, but I didn't really want to make that my career because I felt that that was kind of ruining the nice part of it. Like I used to really enjoy doing that, but once I kind of placed a lot of value on painting and writing, it kind of became not so fun anymore. So I wanted to use the same creative skills, but combine that with like math. And I think that's why I ended up doing engineering because I really think that's like it's like describing complicated and creative solutions mathematically, and that kind of combines both the best of both worlds for me.
So
Yeah.
So it's kind of like POCs solving problems, but using mathematics and the logic and the creativity to get a new solution to a problem and that kind of creative experience
Yeah.
in engineering. I love that. I like that. I do like that. So you decided to pursue that as opposed to going down the art route. So how did you go about picking what kind of university you'd want to go to, or and where did you go to university, and how influential was going to university on your sense of identity, sense of belonging?
So I applied to universities mainly in the UK and the US. And in the end, it kind of came down to just between Imperial and University of California, Berkeley in America. And basically, I had the same kind of offer, same kind of scholarship from both, and I just had to choose. And I decided to just choose Imperial because obviously it's a great university, but also because I've been to London at that point many times before, and I was comfortable with the environment. And it sort of felt similar to Dubai in the sense that people are here from everywhere, and I wouldn't kind of feel you know too out of my comfort zone if I moved here. Um, and so yeah, when I came here, I was just 18 years old, and I did my undergrad at Imperial. And I think that my sense of belonging really shifted then because obviously I was in a different city, different country, different continent, really far away from home. And But at the same time, I was kind of still mixing with a lot of people from all over the world. But a lot of them did grow up in the UK, or maybe they're not from London, but at least they're from the UK. So they kind of shared that experience. But for me, I was just like a tourist here before a few times. So I really shifted my sense of identity to start with. And also when I came here, a lot of people would tell them I'm from Dubai, but a lot of people wouldn't know where that is.
Yeah.
And so you would always have to like qualify that a bit more and say, yeah, it's Middle East, it's kind of a really small country next to all these big other Arab nations. And yeah, it was a question of like, where am I actually, from? Like, how long can I, kind of explain my background? Um, yeah, and then over time that kind of became easier because I lived here for so long now. And so it's like I've lived here almost as long as I've lived in Dubai now. So I think it's a more complicated question now for me, like where am I actually from?
Yeah.
Than definitely when I was younger. Yeah.
It's interesting that you said that actually when you came here and having to qualify, not qualify, but that's where you kind of like realized that although you do have a lot of people from different who may have come here earlier, and so they were more attuned. There were still people from all over the world, but they were more, I don't want to say acclimatized, but they had a different kind of frame of reference of
Mm-hmm.
living in the UK compared to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything that kind of like stood out or struck you as not discriminatory, but that made you feel that you were different? Was there anything like that, or made you feel that maybe you didn't belong, or wasn't it like that for you?
I mean, there were times where it was like that, especially very early on when we didn't really know each other. We're kind of still
Mhm.
testing, ourselves because starting university on its own is just a big thing. But then also, moving countries and all that thing. So at the beginning, there were, just kind of, I guess, typical examples of microaggressions where people were surprised I could speak English and I didn't have like an Arab accent, and other like jokes that were like, oh, did you go to school on a camel? Did you were you like throwing away sand from your books all the time? Because I grew up in the desert, apparently. Or the other side was people just assumed I was really rich and like my dad was like a sheikh and from Dubai. And to be honest, that was the kind of thing that was just the most kind of hurtful at that time, because I mean my parents, they're middle class, I'm middle class, and it took a lot from me and my parents for me to get to Imperial in the first place. So comments like that were just
Yeah.
sometimes like a slap in the face, because it obviously devalues whatever my family has been through.
Mhm.
Um, but over time, that kind of dissipated, I think, because as we kind of all got to know each other and um, just trying to exist as normal people, I think that erases a lot of the preconceived notions of, what people bring to the table depending on where they're from. But definitely initially there was this typical kind of microaggressions that I see basically anywhere new that I go.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So tell me something. You're doing engineering, right? And I'm gonna go here now. As a woman in engineering, were there many women in engineering when you were doing your undergrad degree? And how did that make you? How was that for you?
There weren't many women, I have to say. Maybe there were about 30 in a class of like 120, I think, at
Mhm.
that time. Um, um, yeah, so it's definitely isolating because I didn't grow up with that experience. For me, like I usually had more girls in my science classes than guys. Um, and so it was isolating a bit, but I kind of expected that based on what I'd read about, going to study scientific subjects at university. Um, but I honestly had a great group of friends who happened to be women. So we kind of all supported each other through, being the only few women on the course. Um, And again, yeah, initially there were the few kind of, easy ways to kind of divide yourself between women and not women. But over time, I think that kind of just disappeared too, because yeah, I think most people do realize eventually that there's literally no difference in skills between men or women or anyone else, depending on whatever they're doing. So I think it was just an initial kind of shock to the system. Um, and over time it kind of dissipated a bit. But as I kind of go into a new environment where I'm the only kind of women in the space, the kind of same initial feelings of being alone, people are understanding where I'm coming from, those kind of thoughts, and like also maybe thinking I don't really belong here.
Mhm.
Those initial thoughts always come to me, even now. And it's just sometimes a challenge to kind of deal with that and put that aside before, actually diving into the work and saying, yeah, I deserve to be here and I can do whatever I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Just leading on from that then, because you said that there was kind of like so few that like a quarter of the course were were women. Did you have any kind of like role models, anyone who you or mentors or sponsors who kind of like helped to keep you encouraged? I know you said you had a close network of friends who you could work with. But were there anyone, or was there anyone else who kind of like was slightly ahead of you, who you could look up to, etc.?
I think my biggest role model was definitely my mom, because she'd studied organic chemistry at university, and she had got into a PhD program herself, but she decided to do it eventually. So I always kind of thought that that's anyway where I'm going to like end up, some kind of science type space. And I know because she did it with all her different challenges, and even like 20, 30 years before I did, I knew that, she was the biggest inspiration for me then, at that time, and also still continues to be. So that's kind of always what I held on to, that my mom did it, and at a much more challenging time, and a completely different environment, and for her. And so for me, I have literally all the privileges in the world. I can definitely do this. And so um, I always kind of carry that with me. And also a lot of the lecturers in the department at Imperial who were kind of teaching me, some of them are women, and I would, also look up to them and think, they're a place where I want to be eventually, maybe 10 years down the line. Um, and yeah, it's really kind of cemented the importance of representation, seeing people like yourself in
Mhm.
a position of respect and somewhere where you might want to end up. And I think that's also what really helped me push through, all the challenges that came across my table during my undergrad.
Yeah. So your mum was your biggest inspiration, clearly, right? Because she had already, almost like trailed a path already through, so you knew that you
Mhm.
could follow in her footstep. But along the way, you also found a number of individuals, and having women within the department lecturing you and stuff like that was also very beneficial. Did it help you kind of like feel, again, going back to the idea of belonging, that actually I can occupy this space?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely. I think most people naturally, if you're from like a minority background, whether it's because you're a woman or because you're like from the Middle East, like me as an example, um, you always tend to look for people who look like you or have similar maybe background to you whenever you go into like a space that you maybe don't feel comfortable in. At least that's what I do. And as soon as you see like one person, you kind of like almost mentally breathe a sigh of relief. You're like, okay, if they can survive, you can too. Um, and so I always tended to do that. And even though when I came here, there wasn't anyone exactly like me, but which was fine. But at least there were women who were, in quite senior positions who I was seeing on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that definitely made me feel like I could have a future here if I just stuck it out and, just brave through the few challenging moments.
So
Yeah.
there's one thing about kind of like going off to university to do a degree, but then to go on to do a PhD, that's another big step. What was it that made you want to do a PhD? I know you said that your mum, was it still your mum's influence, or was there other influences that made you think, actually, yes, I need to do this next stage of my educational career?
Yeah, so after I finished my undergrad, I actually worked for a few years in industry, actually in the oil and gas industry, in Scotland. And that was the time where I realized that I really want to go back to university and do research, because I really felt that that was more mentally stimulating than what I was doing at work on like a routine basis. Um, and yeah, I mean, even when I was finishing my undergrad, I always wanted to do a PhD, but I thought, I should get a few years of experience under my belt before committing, because it is such a big commitment, and I wouldn't know if I would like it. But yeah, after working, I kind of realized that it's pretty much what I want to do, and so that decision was basically made because at that time I didn't find what I was doing mentally challenging enough.
Right.
And so that's why I decided to go for a PhD.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go into the science now, right? So give us a glimpse of what it is as a scientist that you're doing. What are the problems, the creative solutions that you're hoping to solve?
Yep. So my research is basically around carbon capture and storage, which is one of the most widely accepted solutions to climate change and alleviating its impact on the world. So basically, the technology involves capturing carbon from different sources. It could be from like power plants, or it could be even directly from air, and then transporting and storing it in the deep subsurface so it doesn't get emitted into the atmosphere, leading to global warming and catastrophic climate change over the years. So basically, my research involves kind of proving that technology works and then hoping that it kind of goes up in scale and is implemented in the world. So during my PhD, I was kind of looking more at the carbon storage side, how the carbon would actually perform underground. And now I'm looking more at the carbon capture side, where I'm looking at how we actually capture the carbon and also produce hydrogen at the same time as the fuel for the future. So that's basically what my research is around. In essence, try to like solve climate change as a problem.
I'm going to push you a little bit to just elaborate a little bit on the idea of carbon capture, because
Mhm.
when I think about what kind of carbon are we trying? Is it the CO2 levels, or is it what kind of things is it that you're trying to pull out of the air so that you can then capture it and then embed it underground, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, so it is CO2, it's carbon dioxide that we're trying to capture and separate from whatever the source is, and then yeah, injecting that into the rocks beneath our feet, but really deep, quite significantly deep. Yeah.
Wow, 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 wow. And I am really fascinated about it because of the whole climate change issues and stuff like that. What in terms of climate change, because when we think about some of the young people who are very active, like Greta Thunberg and things like that, it does seem to be a place where women have taken the lead, or have pushed forward in developing, or bringing awareness. Is that something which you've noticed, or is it just something which just happens to be something I've noticed? I don't know.
Um, yeah, to be honest, I hadn't really picked up on that until you kind of pointed it out. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's just something that kind of um I think a lot of people can understand and also visibly see the impact that climate change is having around us. So I think people who can kind of best describe that to the layperson in a non-patronizing way, I think those people are going to be the best communicators around this subject, really. And Greta Thunberg is a very good example of that. I think she kind of um, talks the walk, basically, which is really important in when you're trying to really stress the importance of something as dangerous as climate change, potentially.
So I'm going to just track back a bit, because you told us that's the research which you do. But what was it that I know you've also given us a glimpse as well of why you went into science, the sciences and engineering. But what was it about climate change and climate capture, or climate change, which kind of like said, this is the area which I want to spend kind of like a good proportion of my life investigating and trying to change? Was there a pivotal moment for you that you thought, yes, this is why I want to do it?
Actually, it's basically the city that I grew up in is because of that. A lot of people might not know this, but like Dubai has really been transformed from the desert to a proper city in just like a very short time, like 20 odd years. So basically my entire childhood, I lived in the same house, I went to the same school, but I grew up, like when I was born, my house was just surrounded by sand, nothing else. And then like when I was like a teenager, the entire city was like full of skyscrapers and big things happening around me. And all of that was fueled by the oil and gas industry that was kind of prevalent back then and even now. But at the same time, we almost immediately felt the impact of climate change. And, the summers got hotter and hotter. We were already at 40-degree summers back when I was a kid. Now it's like 50s, almost 55 degrees. It's really hard to survive. There's almost no rain. And so over just a short period of time, we immediately felt the impact of, using so much oil to fuel the growth of my city, but at the same time, it's ruining maybe my future, my kids' future. So I really felt this personal like drive to, help maybe a problem that my country helped to create a bit. On admittedly a small level, because we are a small country, but we are one of the major oil producers in the world. So I felt like some kind of personal responsibility to kind of help at least do what I can. But now I'm glad to say the UAE has one of the most ambitious goals for climate change. And so I think we all feel that collective ownership of the problem. And I think that's also where the drive within me comes from.
I like that idea about the collective ownership, but also the recognition of the impact which our actions have done or our actions are having. So yeah. Either us or previous generations, the impact that we've had on the environment, and that we have to come up with the solution now in order to be able to have a future. Because without the work which you do, and many like you, without the stuff in highlighting that, then we may well have very bleak futures. I remember last summer when the temperature went up to over 40 degrees here. And I remember how, and you were saying that was kind of like what you were used to as a child, and now it's even hotter, and all of us are looking on and saying, actually, we have to do something about this, or we need to do something about this. I'm just wondering, within your sphere of influence, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you're going to be doing next within your research field? How are you going? What's your plans?
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to be moving on from Imperial imminently, and I'm going to do a research fellowship at Loughborough University, where I'll be starting to develop my independent research program around very similar topics. So pretty much around carbon capture and storage, and using a lot of the knowledge I've gained over the years at Imperial. But the plan is to now kind of, let go of the training wheels and kind of start out on my own and grow my own research group.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. What I'm still coming back to this motivation, because you did say that you realized that when you were in industry, that, or when you did your little stint in industry, that it wasn't as stimulating. But now that you're going to be starting your own research group, has there been anyone who has kind of like said to you, all right, this is the next route that you need to go? Have you had those kind of mentors and sponsors at all?
Yeah, definitely. My PhD supervisors, my current supervisors, my postdoc, they've all kind of been super encouraging, and provided a lot of mentorship and guidance and support in helping me get to this point. It's definitely in academia. I think anyone who kind of goes through this, they know it's not definitely somewhere you can just go and do it by yourself. It's very hard and tricky on the best days. So you definitely need a lot of help and support. And the nice thing is that people are really happy to help and support people kind of starting out on the journey because they've already gone through it themselves. And I hope to kind of take that with me as well whenever I have the opportunity to mentor like younger students, um, and guide them towards whatever they want to achieve potentially.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'm going to see if are there any questions from the audience. I always ask to see if there are any questions from the audience. Otherwise, I've got another two questions I think that we could just explore a little bit more. At the moment, I'm not seeing any hands, but what I'm going to ask is the following question I'm going to ask. All right. Thinking back about your creative days, as it were, when you were younger and you were trying to make your decisions about what you were going to do and why you were going to do it. Thinking back to those days, what advice would you have given to your younger self about what's attainable, what's achievable for going forward? And then the second part of that question is, what would you say, looking back over what you've achieved so far, would be a wow factor that your younger self would have looked on and said, wow, I didn't imagine that I would be able to do that, or I'm so glad that I've been able to achieve that? You can either answer one or both of those
Yeah,
questions.
maybe I answer the second one because it's kind of the answer like immediately popped into my head.
Mm-hmm.
But it would definitely be publishing a paper. At that time it was one paper. The moment I published my first paper with my name as the first author, I was like, yeah, this is a pretty sweet moment because when I was younger and writing, all I wanted to do was get published. When I was older. And I mean that at that time it was not scientific at all, but that's all I wanted to achieve, and I knew if I did that, I would feel pretty proud of myself. So when I got published, and it was a scientific paper, but it was still like this is a big moment for me. It's what I carried since I was a kid. So I think my younger self would look at that and think, yeah, I feel like I did something that kind of aligns with what I wanted to do when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the first part of your question was, what was it again? Sorry.
What advice would you have given to your younger self about
Yeah.
what they could achieve, potentially achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would say something along the lines of, don't limit yourselves, like set your goals as big as possible. And then even if you fall short, it's still something pretty big that you might have achieved. So that's something I still try to do. I want to end up in like somewhere, and then I try to aim for that, and I maybe end up like 80% of that in that direction. I still think, yeah, this is good enough. But I think the biggest advice I would give myself is just my attitude. Like, just so sometimes I tend to get kind of negative and pessimistic. I think the biggest thing I could have told my younger self was, you don't have to be pessimistic. The thing that was meant to happen is still going to happen, whether you think it will never happen. It might happen. So it will just be an easier ride if you kind of just believe it can still happen, instead of thinking it's never going to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. I've just come up with one final question, and it is to do with belonging, and it's to do with the fact that you talked about this third culture, right? And I suppose my question now is, where's home for you? Where do you feel is home? in terms of where do you feel that you belong now? Because originally it was, I'm going to it's just throwing it out there. Where's home?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's too complicated and it's something so complex for my brain to handle. Um, Legally, my home is London. I live here. I've lived here for 12 years now. But do I still think this is my home? No, if I'm truly honest, because home is where I'm from and where my parents' house is and where I want to go back to every time I have a holiday. And I think that for me still is Dubai and might be for a long time. Maybe once I cross over the threshold where I've lived here longer than back home,
Yeah.
be nice to send back home. Then yeah, maybe then. But for now, it's probably Dubai. Yeah, still.
And no, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. It's just one of those things that when you've grown up in an area and then you move away from an area and you've almost then got to a point where it's almost I've lived here longer than I lived at my formative environment. It's kind of, I don't know, it's just something which you start wondering to yourself, where do I call home? Where do I call home? But that's brilliant, you know. So what I want to say is a really all the very best as you go into your new adventure at Loughborough, because I think you're already smashing it as it is, yeah. And I think
Thank you.
the area which you're working in is so work definitely needs to be done. We need more hints and tips about what we need to do to reduce our carbon footprint, right? And I think not just about capturing it, but we want to prevent it from actually going into the air in the first place and reduce our emissions, etc. So it would be really good to follow your path and see what you do. So yeah, definitely we will keep in touch with you and see how you're getting on. But it's been wonderful having you as our guest this week on Imperial as One's Belonging series. And thank you so much for sharing your account with us, your story. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It was great. I had a great time talking about this. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm going to just share what we're going to be looking at our guest for next week. And our guest next week is Anisha Bahanda. And Anisha is a lab technician at Imperial College, and she's also one of the co-chairs of Imperial 600. So it'll be really nice to hear her story as well. And if you have missed any in the past, then please have a look at our YouTube channel where you'll see other guests who have shared their stories. And you can find that at tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And there's some, I can't believe it, we're almost at 140 guests, which seems a bit crazy compared to when we started. But these are just a few. And it's just great that they've shared their stories and that we can learn so much from each other. This kind of like puts me in mind of what you've been saying, Humera, in that we take a little bit of everybody's culture and identity, and we all have kind of like a third culture as such. But until we hear everyone's stories, we just don't know. So I'm so glad that we were able to share your story, and you'll be added to this montage as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, and I will see you again next week. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Let me just stop the record.